I don't want to be alone. I long to be in the temple. We must find our way back home, and we can be in the temple. Let's all go to the temple.
Well, hello. Here we are
Here we
in the
are.
temple with Billy Bottle
Hello, and Dougald Hine.
and Dougald Hine. Yes, yeah. Wow, how did this happen? What are we doing?
Well, quite. It came to me. We don't do things by halves, do we?
No.
Well, this time we're doing them by sevenths.
Well, welcome, or you should be saying welcome. I'm sure it's your temple that we're in, rather than
That's true, actually. Yes, welcome. Welcome to the temple. Thank you, Dougald, for inviting me into, creating a space together, for this week to go through the stages of the Temple of Shibboleth, as called. And it just so happens that it fits nicely with the release of the album, which came out on Friday, just at the end of March. 31st of March came out. And yeah, it's been a 3 and a bit year path to get here, and it seemed like the right time to share the stages of the temple.
Well, there are many things to unpack in the days ahead, I would say. But maybe it's a good idea if I ask you who, what, where, when Shibboleth might be.
Wow, where to start? So, Shibboleth herself is the name of a Shetland pony who came to me in deepest lockdown. And in a way, she was sort of the beginning of sort of coming out of a very very intimate place that I went sort of in myself out of the process of grieving. So at the beginning of 2020, first of all, I was grieving for Nell Gifford, a very, very good friend who ran and set up visionary, really, of Gifford Circus, who I had the pleasure of working with not just once, but I ran away from the circus twice. And yeah, the first time was back in 2004, and I did 3 years on the road, traveling with the circus, mainly around the Cotswolds. Got a very big name for themselves in the Cotswolds and way, way beyond. And then after 12 years of thinking that I'd left, I realised my heart was still there. They needed a piano player, and I went back. So after another 2 years on the road, sadly, Nell died of breast cancer, and it was the end of a world. It was the end of a world, the end of an era for a lot of people. A big circus family throughout 20 years, more than 20 years. And so, basically what happened about 3 weeks afterwards was I was due to start care work, live-in care work. And I'd already spent quite a bit of time, maybe 10 years, working with people with learning disabilities in a care capacity, but much more in like a music therapy, therapeutic music sort of capacity. And my mum had always been in elderly care, And so in many ways I was sort of following in her footsteps. But I found this live-in care work, so with an agency. And the day that I was due to start caring for this 90-year-old lady, my grandma died. So I got the news that morning, and obviously I was a bit stuck. I was thinking, what do I do? You know, and my mum said, "Do it. You need to do it." You know, so I felt like two worlds had ended, and I was on the absolute fault line of that, having to not just carry on but start something new. You know, and
And
for me,
something
this is
something
what this
very
whole project
intense as well.
is
I mean,
about.
it's
Yeah,
not a 9 to 5 job being a live-in
no,
carer, right?
exactly. It was, in many ways, it was a baptism of fire, and it was further intensified, by this loss as well. Um, so yeah, in many ways, the whole project is about grief, um, and certainly the first day, in terms of my sort of on the ground day to day life, the practical world, the beginning Monday is the wash, and the first thing I did every day was wash Mom's body. It was 7 in the morning. She needed a bed bath, and she had a very, very sort of strict order of how everything worked. Within that process. So yeah, that was every morning for about 5 weeks, and I realised right at that moment that care is the most important job in the world.
So this structure of the 7 day
Mm.
week, obviously,
Mm.
that's part of what we're going to be exploring,
Yeah.
and there are different layers to it, but the idea of there being a domestic task that's proper to each day of the week, where did you first come across that tradition?
Yeah. I mean, certainly I was aware of the idea of washing day, I think. Probably passed down through my mum and my grandma. And I also do remember this thing about don't do the washing on a bank holiday, on a bank holiday Monday. Have you heard that one?
No, I haven't. Why?
Yeah.
What happens? What goes wrong?
Well, exactly. I mean, I suppose really there's two sides to that. One is, you need to rest on the bank holiday, and the other half is it only further intensifies. Monday is normally wash day. You've had Sunday best, and then the day afterwards, you're starting the process again, and obviously in I suppose in a kind of pre-modern situation, in the UK at least, Sunday was the first day. That was sort of considered the first day, and that's in many ways the more kind of biblical thing. And I suppose what I realised about Monday was that it was the beginning of life again in the house, in the home. So I suppose in my schema that sort of made sense that would be at the beginning.
And so, in the course of the album, you go through the 7 days of the week, and on the one
Mm,
hand, you're looking at the kind of cosmic symbolism
mm,
of the gods and the planets
mm,
and all of that, and on the other hand, you're using this kind of tradition of first you have washing on day on Monday, and then you have ironing day and mending day, and so on through the week.
mm, mm,
But it feels like you sort of turn this almost into a mystery cycle because, and we'll hear this in a minute when
mm,
when we listen to today's
mm,
track. But these processes become not just domestic tasks to be done;
mm,
they become a thing to be done to the self or to have done to
mm,
you,
mhm,
and therefore a kind of a journey of 7 stages of transformation,
mm,
crossing 7 thresholds. What, I mean, before we have a listen to the wash, what do you
mm.
want to tell us about washing day, about this beginning of the week? What meanings does that have for you in this process?
I mean, I suppose it's worth starting with what I was doing back then, which was caring for somebody else, and probably something that I connect way back with washing somebody else is the washing of the feet and the I suppose it's sharing vulnerability together. So Monday is basic trust. It's soap. It's the root chakra. It's the moon. It's the earth. It's feeling connected both to where we are, the place that we're in, orientation, and also perhaps the beginnings of looking around and connecting with other beings that we may or may not recognize as being mirrors.
Okay, well, we're going to play the track in a moment and see we've got a few people watching along. Do say hello in the comments or chip in with messages or questions as we go along, and we'll bring those up. But what should we be listening out for? This track, it's the third track on the album, right? And it's called
That's
The
right.
Wash?
It's called The Wash, yes.
What should we be listening out for?
Okay, so it's the start of the week. I think basically the thing to listen out for is well, it's a question. What's being washed for you today?
Okay. Well, I can just show everyone. We've got laundry day going on here in the shoe shop.
Oh, dear.
In Astavola, because we follow the structure of the week in the temple every week, I promise. Well, it's very neatly typed in any case. So let me see if we can master this set of tools and put a bit of music on. And we're going to listen to the whole track, and then we'll be back together talking about it and seeing where the conversation goes in the next half hour or so.
Reality is so
That was The Wash by Billy Bottle's Temple of Shibboleth.
That was the wash, wasn't it? Wow. And we didn't quite get sucked down the plug hole. It was a near thing.
Oh, good.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about who else we're hearing besides yourself on
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose the kind of main collaborator in many ways on this album was Viv Goodwin Dark, whose house I'm in at the moment. And she's on flute, she's singing as well. And throughout the album, she plays various instruments, including the crumhorn and cello as well. And Viv and I have been working together for about 12, 13 years on music, and she was part of another band before this, which was Billy Bottle's Billy Bottle and Multiple. So, like, basically, after 4 months of being locked down with my parents, Viv said, "Come and stay with me." So we had a good 2 years working on this album together at her house, and not just working on the music, but I suppose the music came out of the following of this path, of this cycle, of these different functions on different days. So we had a lot of time to explore what it meant for us individually, and with the rest of the house. And yeah, I suppose for a lot of us in lockdown, we were maybe redefining what home meant, or we were thrown into situations where home was drastically different than it had ever had been. And home is, I would say, the main theme on this album, really. And that's one answer to what the temple is, and I suppose kind of ironically, if you like, since September, I haven't had a fixed home. I've been mainly doing live-in care work, or been staying with friends, and most of my things are in a lockup. And I suppose in many ways I feel like it came at a good time, because I sort of reached a point where this ritual was kind of embedded in me enough that the home, like my home, has become smaller in many ways. It's like I can hold it with me based on these different meanings, to each day. So I suppose in that sense, it's kind of like the temporal becomes spatial somehow, and vice versa.
I almost heard as you said that the temporal becomes spatial.
Yes, that's what I said.
It is what you said. So the
Yes, it is what
temporal
I
and the temple become spatial, right?
said.
I,
Yes.
because this is the other thing, is that you were working with us that spring, later on in the spring,
That's right.
when we were running the first Homeward Bound series, the first time we'd taken the kinds of work that we try to do here at a school called Home into an online environment, and slightly surprised ourselves with how much was possible. And one of the lines that came out of the groups that we worked with over that couple of years, and you were working with us as producer and host on each of those Homeward Bound series. It was Kelly Lee Hickey, an artist in Australia, who said, when we gather in these virtual spaces, whether it's Zoom or whether it's the live stream here, she said, time becomes the space in which we meet. And in the same way, what I'm hearing with you is that, having built this ritual of the week as a kind of layered, meaningful, structured space of home, that gives you a kind of portable home, or a portable sense of the security, the safety, that if we're lucky can be something that is associated with the feeling of being at home, becomes something that you can kind of carry around with you and pop up where you need it.
Yes.
Is that what
No,
you're trying to give the
absolutely.
rest of us by putting this into the form of an album?
Sorry, say that again.
Is that what you're trying to give the rest of us by putting this in the form of an album?
I would say so. I would say so, definitely. I mean, in many ways, I suppose there is the sense in which my intention is only like what's been founded here, in the sense that I, very much felt like it was breathed into me rather than, that it's a. This, this would be my description for most creative pursuits, like certainly that I do, which is that I don't get a lot of choice in the matter. Um, so in that sense, it's kind of like this is something that was given to me that I'm sharing, and the best way for me to do that is musically, um, and very much part of that is that the architecture of the week for me is a kind of music. Um, so you know, in I come very much from like the John Cage kind of approach to listening, which says that everything is music or none of it is. Um, and in so doing, it means that an action can be a musical gesture, in which case, in the scheme of the week, um, washing has a practical use, but it also has a kind of musical temperature. And I suppose that's where I kind of connect to that Thoreauvian thing about affecting the quality of the day, you know. And there is a kind of interplay. There's like a dance between, um, the self and the day, like what you perceive around you has a kind of echo, if you choose to kind of act on that. And don't forget that this comes out of like the ground zero of my existence, at like a particular point in my life. And it was, it's not just the grief, it's like the having to struggle on. Like I'd already had at least a couple of times in my life where, A, I didn't want to continue, and B, a near death experience where I realized, no, I really do want to continue. So I remember you said something to me years ago on a bus, possibly in Greece, and it was something about like living is living is to solve what we do to keep us from being bored. It was something like that. I don't know if that reminds you of anything.
It reminds me of being on a bus in Greece
Does
together.
it? Does
Uh,
it?
yes,
Oh, that's a start.
yes. I'm not sure what I meant, but
Hmm.
I mean, I suppose I've sometimes talked about living to tell the tale. That in some way, what we're doing with our lives is kind of um, making a story worth telling out of the time we're given, and
Hmm.
maybe that relates to that thing of you know not being boring. Um,
Hmm.
hmm,
Hmm.
yeah, we're gonna find ourselves going down so many rabbit holes and back alleys of memory lane over the
I'm
course of this
sure.
week
I'm
together, aren't
sure.
we, Billy? We shared so many different chapters of.
Yeah, I think that's in the small print, really, isn't it?
I think it is. I think if anyone's
Yeah.
watching this, then that's pretty much that's what they're here for, I suspect.
I love how we have 7 people watching right now. That's
This is
great.
great. Yes, 7 people, one for each day of the week. We can allocate the tasks between
Lovely,
us.
lovely. Yes, perfect. Um, I'm wondering if there's anything else to tell you about sort of washing in the mythical sense, because what I did once. I suppose you can kind of plot where I went in my head with um, this project, if you like, in that after the 5 weeks of intense labour, fairly soon afterwards was lockdown, and I ended up locked down with my parents, and there was something of the return to like a sort of almost like a childlike state, which I think
Mm.
inevitably is there, if you spend time with your parents, if your parents are still alive. then there's some kind of process of reversion, and quite a lot of my childhood was spending time in my room, um, you know, dreaming up labyrinthine structures, um, which usually became music. And I suppose being bored in a sense,
Mm.
kind of like being bored off the back of having a very deep and kind of life-changing experience. It's sort of like the ashes afterwards, sort of where do I go?
Mm.
And there were a lot of people back in those days, 3 years ago, saying, "What day is it?"
Mm.
Um, so I think there was for me there was like a will to kind of solidify, these practices that I'd undertaken. And I think it's probably worth talking about tradition and how that kind of fits into what that experience was like for me, because I think I told you before, like in my 20s, and probably my early 30s, I sort of spent time, um, feeling a lot of things about climate change, particularly, which, you know, actually, I know what it was. It was the myth of progress. Like for me, that phrase, it it both made sense of a lot of things, but it also, being in a headspace where I actually didn't want to be here right now in modernity, um, meant that I kind of cultivated a sort of attitude of, okay, so if progress isn't the thing, what does progress look like in my life? You know, and I think growing up in the north, growing up in like with quite a distrust of authority, it meant that I was, very much in a space, um, it's still in my mid 30s where um, I didn't really think that tradition offered me anything whatsoever. Um, and so I suppose a lot of what happened for me in the early 2020 was a kind of epiphany of perhaps there is something there. I was living in a small town which is very old fashioned. It's more like a village. I described it as a village, and everyone around me was calling it a town. And there was something about the scale of it. There was something about the fact that I was spending my days with this 190-year-old woman. A gardener would appear once a week, and he wasn't allowed in the house, but he was given a cup of tea, and I had to ring a little bell to summon him to the back door. And I remember speaking to you around that time and saying, it's wonderful here because the pavements are narrow. And what it means is that people have to actually acknowledge each other as they walk down the street, and they have to have a little dance to decide like who gets the pavement and who doesn't and who waits and this kind of thing. And that's just like one tiny example of, I suppose, the kinds of things that I learnt to love when I had to. Like I didn't have a choice but to
Mm.
kowtow is the wrong word, but like to adopt everything I saw around me, because I suppose I'd gone from kind of maybe feeling like I wanted to escape to being told, no, no, you have to be here, and you're not doing this for you, you're doing it for somebody else. Um, and so within that, there was some groove, there was some niche of something which came before me needs to be honoured.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's two senses of before that you've just put very close together. One is oh, something that came before me in the sense of a relationship to the past, and the other is finding yourself in that position of taking responsibility, taking care of somebody where you're having to put their needs before yours in order to look after them because they're more vulnerable than you are. And I'm just really struck by listening to you talk now. a whole set of things about the moment out of which this album began come a little bit clearer for me, because there's this sense, and you have to bear in mind that because I lived through the pandemic in Sweden, there wasn't the same intensity of experience of lockdown, because that's not exactly what happened here. I mean, life did contract, it did kind of get quieter and smaller and more local, but it's the sense I'm getting listening to you speak about your experience, but also in a way that probably was part of lots of other people's experiences in places where the lockdown policies were rather tighter. One is this sense that home went strange, or took up a lot more of the space of life. Home went from being, I often quote, I think it's something that Ivan Illich said somewhere about how one of the things that happens in modernity is that home simply becomes a garage in which workers are parked in between shifts. So there's a kind of diminution of what home is. But, even if some of the performance of it was rather kind of a sort of trivializing when it becomes the sort of social media sourdough craze and so on, there's nonetheless a sense of being thrown back into, locked inside homes, and therefore home taking up more space and potentially calling for more reflection in that moment. But then also the sense that the week went strange, that because of being at home all the time, whereas the week is often structured by us moving around to different spaces. Weekdays are days when we go to school or to the office for many of us. And with that being taken away, the week goes stranger in the way that sometimes feels like it happens around Christmas and New Year, when you start to lose track of what day of the week it is. Or sometimes people describe this after they've retired and they no longer have that structuring pattern.
Absolutely.
Of the day job as the source of orientation. Learning to love what you have to, making a virtue out of it. Feels like those are some of the things that we're landing on here on washing day at the beginning of the week. Is there anything else that we ought to make sure we do? And I'm doing this, I'm remembering the kind of all of the washing hands things that there were at the beginning.
Well, absolutely.
Well,
absolutely. And I suppose, sorry, did you ask the question, or was there more?
I thought of asked the question. Is there anything else we must make sure we do on washing day so that we have done our part of the ritual of the week?
I see. I mean, for a start, I'm going to place the soap. I don't think I can see the frame.
If you just pull it back a little bit.
Put it back. There we are.
The soap on the fishy dishy.
On the fishy dishy, exactly. I suppose the main thing here is to look into the soap and feel its potential. It has different forms depending on whether it's wet or dry. And none of these processes are static, they are processes. There is a beginning, there is an end. And in the song, we wash, we soap, we scrub, we rinse, and we dry. And I suppose in its purest form for me, when there was nothing to do but really, really get in deep on that. There was nothing to do on a Monday but do one of those stages for everything I was doing. If I was getting in touch with the bank, I was, for the first time, I was washing a query. And then later in the week, maybe I'd be mending the query. And so, I mean, there is a sense in which there's a kind of sort of numerology about the day that you choose to do things on. And I suppose maybe that's something we can touch on later in the week, is sort of that, the idea of sort of manifestation and what that could mean in a kind of, in the healthiest possible way. I feel like there's something there we could explore.
Great. I feel like we're going to travel further and deeper into the mysteries, the mystery cycle of the week. So this was the other funny thing, that there was a lot of kind of serendipity and interweaving for us during that season, that when the album began, because I was working with these two glass artists, Philip and Monica, Philip Baldwin and Monica Guggisberg, who had an exhibition at the Glass Museum in Ebeltoft in Denmark. And they'd got in touch with me because they were interested in Dark Mountain, and we had a lot of conversations. And in the end, I wrote this sort of 12-part essay for the book. But the exhibition was called Walking in the Void, and all of the work was kind of within the movements of the planets and of these the spheres, and these, obviously glass is a great material in which to make vivid astronomical or astrological bodies. But writing that led me into thinking about the history of the week, and that's where that phrase that we were sort of talking about around that time came from, of the, it's the world's longest running, continually repeated mantra, is this list of seven planets or bodies, seven deities. It's not quite culturally universal, but it has spread to nearly all contemporary human.
Absolutely. I had something here to read about the week, actually. Where's it gone?
Oh, yeah.
About its sort of its very beginnings. You just bear with me a second. Because yes, I mean,
we should bring things to read to these calls, shouldn't we?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose perhaps we tend to think of it, as, a lot of this album is about defining what we do mean by tradition, and in so doing, what are the bits that are worth hanging on to, in your various writings, and work, you talk about redrawing the maps, and sometimes that doesn't mean, completely setting fire to it,
Yeah, it's revaluing things, drawing different things to our attention within a landscape that's there already around us.
Absolutely. So yeah, this is just kind of about the very, very early evidence of 7-day periods, and I can't pretend that I know a lot about this, but I'm going to read it anyway because I think it's interesting. So it's just like an overview of the history of using a 7-day week, and so in the ancient Near East, the earliest evidence of an astrological significance of a 7-day period is connected to Gudea, the priest king of Lagash in Sumer, so Sumerian time during the Gutian dynasty, about 2100 BCE, who built a 7-room temple. I'm very jealous. Which he dedicated with a 7-day festival. And so the connection there is a flood story of the Assyro-Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh. And the storm lasts for 7 days. The dove is sent out after 7 days. And the Noah-like character, whose name I won't pronounce, leaves the ark 7 days after it reaches the firm ground. What I found really interesting about this was that the Babylonians celebrated it like within each new moon, they celebrated the 7th, 14th, 21st, and 28th days as holy days, but they also called them evil days. So inauspicious for certain activities. Obviously, this connects more to our seventh day. But interesting that, the whole sort of navigation of perhaps what the other days might mean, was based on what that kind of end day or rest day sort of signified. So yeah, I thought it was useful to kind of bring that just to go backwards from maybe what we think of as being the kind of Christian or monotheist tradition. And also, like, maybe that's something else to touch upon, is how this very sort of man-made, if you like, 7-day cycle comes out of and also intersects with, of course, things like the moons and the actual physical stages of each planet. We have a Mercury day every week, but there isn't really anything particularly Mercurian about it when it comes to looking at the sky.
Well, we're approaching the end of day one of washing day. It feels rather appropriate that we got to the end and there was a flood.
Well, exactly. The Great Flood. The Great Flood. That's how we start. Yes.
Have you got any closing thoughts that you want to leave us with before we say goodbye for today, to take away and carry with us until we meet again in the temple tomorrow for Ironing Day?
I suppose the main thing is that if your washing hasn't been hung out to dry yet, then maybe now's a good time.
Maybe now is a good time indeed. There you go. The old laundrette. So thank you very much, Billie, for getting us started, for pushing the button, setting the cycle into motion. You said something about temperature earlier, and I was wondering, is it a 30-degree cycle or 40 or 60? How hot do we need to wash?
Well, yes, that's true. I tend to like to be gentle, actually. I think 30.
Well, this has been a very gentle beginning to the week. I'm sure things will get stranger, weirder, wilder, more playful
sure
as the days go on. Thanks to everyone who's watching along with us now, and everyone who's been watching over the course of the past 45 minutes. We had Eric in Canada putting together bread while he was listening. That's interesting. Dan now says Monday for washing, probably the last day I'd pick. Yeah, we'll have to look at some of the different traditions around this, because I have a feeling that there are different mappings of the tasks to the days of the week as well.
Oh, definitely.
Do a bit of research on that and bring that back to muddle things up as the week goes on.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, thanks again, Billie. Thanks, everyone. Lovely to see you today for our first day in the temple. See you again tomorrow at the same time.